You there, say this in Mandarin. Respect is earned, not given. The words rang out like a whip across the banquet hall. He had built his fortune on international trade, and he never let anyone forget it. Tonight, surrounded by investors flown in from Beijing, he decided to demonstrate his favorite sport, humiliation masked as entertainment. His eyes swept across the line of staff, waiters, busboys, a single maid polishing glassware near the back wall. "Come on," he teased, switching briefly to Mandarin before snapping back into English. "Surely one of you has been listening when I speak to my partners. Anyone?" A waiter shifted nervously, lowering his gaze to the floor. Another fumbled with his tray. No one dared answer. The guests chuckled, some politely, others cruelly. "They only know how to carry plates," one investor muttered, assuming no one in uniform could understand. The millionaire laughed louder. "See, empty hands, empty minds. That's the problem with hiring staff for show instead of skill." He raised his glass to the room. "Respect is earned, not given, but in their world it's never earned." A ripple of amusement spread down the table. Forks clinked, heads nodded. In the corner, the maid Mara continued polishing a wine glass with her small, folded cloth. Slow, deliberate circles, as though she hadn't heard a word. Her uniform was plain, her posture slightly bowed. She looked like background scenery, the kind of person no one noticed until the glass ran dry or the floor grew sticky. But inside her, something burned. She had been tested before, in this very house, with this very language, Mandarin, the tongue she had studied for years, alone at night, long before this job. The language she once used to negotiate contracts in Beijing boardrooms, back when her name appeared in conference programs instead of cleaning rosters. And here he was, this man who couldn't even pronounce tones correctly, flaunting his fluency to amuse investors at her expense. Mara lowered her eyes, folding her cloth into a neat rectangle. Her fingers pressed into the soft cotton, as if squeezing down the urge to speak. One investor leaned toward the millionaire. "Maybe you should give them an easier phrase, something a child could manage." The millionaire grinned. "Ah, yes, good idea. Let's test them with a proverb." He turned back to the staff. "Repeat this if you can. Kill the chicken to scare the monkey." Gasps of laughter circled the table. The waiters froze. None dared move, let alone open their mouths. The meaning of the phrase wasn't lost on anyone fluent. Humiliate one to warn the rest. And tonight the millionaire had chosen his chicken. Mara's polishing slowed. The cloth pressed tighter against the glass. She knew the phrase. She knew the sting. She had seen professors dissect its use in ancient texts. She could recite it in perfect Beijing cadence, explain its historical context, trace its modern applications in negotiation tactics. But she stayed silent, because silence, she knew, was its own kind of strategy. The laughter built. Someone clapped the millionaire on the back. The staff remained still, heads bowed. And in that moment the cloth in Mara's hand changed. It was no longer just fabric for wiping fingerprints from glass. It was a tether, a reminder, a shield against the weight of humiliation pressing on her chest. She folded it once more, tucked it firmly against her palm, and kept polishing. The millionaire raised his glass again, triumphant. "See, respect is earned, not given, and tonight it is mine." The room erupted in applause. Waiters shuffled, embarrassed. Mara finished the glass, placed it carefully on the tray, and picked up another. Her face was unreadable, but in her silence something stirred. Something that none of them, not the laughing investors, not the smirking millionaire, not even the staff shrinking in shame, could see yet. Because Mara's silence was not weakness. It was preparation. The night hadn't begun with cruelty. It never does. It began with checklists. At 3:17 p.m., hours before the chandeliers glowed and the napkins took the shape of swans, Mara stood in the supply room, rolling the sleeves of her gray uniform past her elbows. She ran a finger down a laminated card she'd made herself, not company-issued, just hers, a column of tiny boxes with handwriting so neat it could have been printed. Ice wells sanitized. Stemware inspected for chips. Table legs leveled with invisible felt pads. Hydrangeas trimmed at a diagonal, they drink better that way. Battery sets charged. Lapel mics, candle lighters, the sommelier's tiny flashlight. No one asked her to own all that. No one saw it. But when the night went smoothly, someone else took the credit. She pushed open the swinging door and stepped into the hall, a high-ceilinged corridor of framed abstract art and a runner rug that swallowed footsteps. She paused, listening. There it was, the faint, irregular hum of the champagne fridge. Too warm. She pulled the unit slightly from the wall and cleared the clogged vent with a soft brush, then set a small thermometer inside, closing the door gently. She waited for the compressor to settle into a steady purr. It did. Mara's hand paused mid-polish. The cloth's blue stitch burned against her palm. She felt the floor tilt further. She could already see where this error led, an agreement built on misunderstanding, millions wired into an abyss, blame hurled at staff who couldn't defend themselves. Her breath caught in her throat, not from fear, but from memory. She had sat in Beijing boardrooms where one mistranslated clause nearly toppled a merger. She'd watched a single tone turn a handshake into a lawsuit. She had lived in the space between languages, where bridges saved lives and mistakes burned them. And now, here she was, polishing crystal while a man played at brilliance with words he did not own. The dishwasher drifted close, stacking plates, whispering without moving his lips. He said liability, didn't he? Not reputation, Mara gave the smallest nod. You should, he began, then bit it back, because what could she do? She was wallpaper. At the head table, the Beijing woman with silver hair tapped her glass again, once, twice, 3 times. No one noticed but Mara. It wasn't impatience. It was warning. A signal passed between people who knew the stakes of language. Mara bent over a glass, polishing, hiding her mouth behind the rim. In perfect Mandarin, low enough only the glass could hear, she repeated the man's true question. Ruguo fuse king when shei shangden. If liability arises, who carries it? The syllables resonated against the crystal like a secret prayer. The dishwasher froze. He'd heard it. His eyes widened, awe and fear tangled together. Why don't you say it out loud? He whispered. Mara folded her cloth again, aligning the blue stitch with the seam of her palm. Because timing is louder than volume. The millionaire continued, oblivious, turning the conversation into a story about his early deals in Shanghai. The investors listened politely but not fully. They had heard the misstep. They would remember it. A younger waiter stumbled past Mara, tray shaking. He's going to ruin it, he muttered, nearly dropping a spoon, and we'll pay for it when the investors walk. Mara steadied the tray with one hand. Breathe, she said softly. The waiter exhaled shakily and moved on, but Mara stayed still. She felt the cloth's cotton against her skin, the familiar ridge of the stitch. She could sense the room's momentum bending toward collapse. And yet she did nothing. Not yet, because every boardroom, every banquet, every negotiation had its fulcrum. That one moment when silence broke louder than speech. She was waiting for it. In the corridor, the buzzing sconce flickered again. A sharp whine like a violin string stretched too far. Mara glanced toward it, then back to the table. Everything was vibrating, lights, words, egos, a system straining at the seams. At the table, the millionaire smirked and tossed out another phrase, one he clearly thought would dazzle. Jai jai wai jai, bu jai wai bu jai. Again he mangled it, turning the sacred into nonsense. The investors' faces tightened further. The translator stumbled, and Mara breathed. Her lips pressed shut, but her heart beat the phrase in perfect rhythm. Know what you know what you don't. That is wisdom. The cloth trembled slightly in her hand. She pressed it tighter. Hold. Not yet. Across the room, the dishwasher muttered, if you don't say it, this whole night's a lie. Mara looked at him, steady. A lie can stand for hours. Truth waits years. I can wait minutes. She set down the glass, picked up another, wiped in calm circles. The millionaire raised his glass again, ready for another display. The guests leaned in, waiting. The room hung like a curtain about to fall. Mara folded the cloth one more time. The blue line faced outward now, a horizon drawn across her palm. When the moment came, she would not just speak. She would turn the night. It came suddenly, like a curtain tearing. The Beijing guests exchanged quiet words among themselves, voices low, syllables clipped with formality. They had heard enough. Their politeness had stretched to breaking. The silver-haired woman shook her head, almost imperceptibly, and one of the younger men signaled for the check. The millionaire didn't notice at first. He was busy performing another idiom, raising his glass like a conductor's baton. When he finally caught the gesture, his smile froze, then cracked into irritation. Leaving already? he asked, switching to Mandarin again, but the tone slurred by wine. Surely the night is young. The silver-haired woman rose gracefully. Her Mandarin reply was gentle but firm. Some of us have early flights. The millionaire translated to the room with a smirk. Ah, they're tired. Jet lag. But Mara had heard the difference. It wasn't fatigue, it was disappointment. As the investors stood, staff rushed to clear plates, refill glasses, tidy chairs, anything to erase the awkwardness. The banquet manager flapped her clipboard like a fan. Move, 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 she hissed at the staff line. A waiter bumped into Mara in the chaos, sending a cascade of forks clattering onto her tray. The sound was sharp, accusing. The manager's head snapped around. Watch it, don't you dare draw attention. Her voice cut low, like a knife meant for flesh under clothing. Mara steadied the tray, the cloth with the blue stitch gripping against her palm. She opened her mouth almost, but the manager silenced her with a glare. Back corner, now you're making us look worse. The humiliation seared hotter than the millionaire's jabs, banished to the shadows by her own side. She stepped back, retreating toward the service wall. Her cloth folded itself in her hand, a square fortress of silence. She pressed her back against the wallpaper. They all thought she was invisible, inert, part of the scenery. From the corner, she watched the investors file out with polite bows, their eyes careful not to linger on the staff. The silver-haired woman gave one last look around the room. Her gaze brushed Mara, paused, softened, then moved on. The millionaire, red with embarrassment, waved for another bottle of wine. Ungrateful, he muttered. I give them the show of their lives and they can't even stay to the end. He laughed harshly, pouring himself. Their loss. The translator hunched in his chair, headset limp in his hand. The staff line shifted nervously, like soldiers waiting for punishment. Mara stood in her corner, cloth clenched tight. Her chance had come and gone. She had heard the missteps, seen the investors recoil, felt the moment when one clear correction could have turned the tide. And she had stayed silent. Now it was over. The dishwasher appeared beside her, face pale. They're gone, he whispered, and he's furious. He'll blame us. Mara exhaled through her nose, steady but heavy. He will. The manager swooped in, eyes darting, voice sharp. You don't think I didn't see you watching. You looked ready to speak. If you'd embarrassed him. She stopped herself, glanced nervously toward the millionaire. Just keep your mouth shut or we all pay for it. Mara lowered her gaze, obedient, silent. The manager swept away. The dishwasher shook his head. You had it, didn't you? The words, the right ones. Mara folded the cloth again, the blue line sharp as horizon against her palm. She whispered so faintly he barely heard. Yes. Then why? Because the room wasn't listening yet. But even as she said it, doubt pressed against her ribs. Maybe she had waited too long. Maybe silence had cost her the only moment that mattered. The quartet in the corner packed their instruments. Chairs scraped. Guests filtered toward the door. The banquet was unraveling like thread cut loose. And Mara stood in the shadows, cloth warm in her hand, looking for a horizon that suddenly felt far away. The last plates were clearing when the hinge of the night finally gave. Half the guests had drifted toward the doors, murmuring apologies to schedules and flights. The quartet packed their bows. The millionaire, wounded and louder for it, poured himself another inch of red and announced, coffee, then cigars, as if an empire could be forced back to its seat by caffeine. The silver-haired Beijing woman reappeared at the doorway, shawl over one arm. She had returned for something small, a forgotten business card, a polite farewell, but paused when she heard the millionaire resume his show. He raised his chin, smiled to the remaining crowd, and gestured at the translator to reconnect a remote line. A partner's face flickered onto the wall screen from a hotel room 12 time zones away. One more question, the partner said in Mandarin, careful and exact. If the risk matures into legal responsibility, who specifically assumes indemnity under the revised structure? The translator lifted his headset, waited for the boss. The millionaire didn't wait. He cut in, all confidence and slur. He wants to know if bad press counts as loss, he announced in English, then attempted a breezy Mandarin ad on that scrambled 3 tones and 1 verb. Mara felt the floor tilt that last merciless inch. You could build an entire disaster on a single wrong word. She had seen it. She had translated the aftermath with her hands shaking years ago. Contracts clawed back, jobs lost, a man crying in a parking lot because a tone mark had reversed a promise. The dishwasher, stacking cups beside her, whispered, "That's not what he asked." Mara's cloth lay warm in her palm, blue stitch aligned to the seam of her hand like a horizon line. She watched the translator's face, how survival pulled the man toward silence. She watched the silver-haired woman's eyes, how disappointment clouded then cleared into resolve. She watched the millionaire, how he mistook the room's stillness for assent. Timing is louder than volume. Mara stepped forward one pace from the wall, no flourish, no permission asked, only accuracy. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Her words left her mouth in flawless, winter-true Beijing diction, each tone landing as if it had studied the floor plan before stepping. Ta wen de shi, ruguo fuse shangshu, zai jengsen de jie guzia, judy yu shui lai shangden bachang zaren. He asked who, specifically, will bear indemnity if liability matures under the revised structure. The room stopped breathing. Wine halfway to lips paused, a fork suspended like a compass needle trying to choose a direction. The quartet froze mid-fold, a velvet case open like a mouth learning a new word. The translator's headset slipped from his fingers and dangled against his chest, useless now. The silver-haired woman turned fully, eyes widening not at the content. She knew the content, but at the precision, the cadence that belonged to old classrooms and courtrooms, the north wind inside every vowel. Mara kept her gaze gently down, as if the words had chosen the air themselves and she was merely making room. She set the cloth on the sideboard, palm released, tremor absorbed by cotton. Then she lifted her eyes just enough to meet the screen, the remote partner, brows knit, suddenly alert. In Mandarin, she continued, tone steady as a metronome. Sikian dui minju sunhai de fanny bushi zhengti. Women zai zheli tan de shi zarenjding, hei bachang yuwu de mink gishu. The earlier rendering of reputation damage was not the issue. We are discussing allocation of liability and the clear assignment of indemnity obligations. No drama, just correction, clean as a blade rinsed under water. A soft sound moved through the remaining guests, the collective exhale of people realizing the floor has been crooked under them and someone just showed where. The millionaire laughed, too late and too loud. "That's what I said," he snapped, switching to Mandarin that immediately betrayed him. "Wo gangang yisi ju shijij." I literally meant that. Mara's gaze shifted not to him but to the language itself, as if to steady it. She addressed the remote partner with a small incline of her head. "King Yuanliang," she said, "forgive me. Wo ji shi ji zhuli, keshi wo ting dao de shi fuse, bing bushi minjiu. Ruguo shi fuse, na jiu bixu zion ziongaming fuse judi, ranhu kai nang tan yihu de bachang fangshi." I'm only an assistant, but the word I heard was liability, not reputation. If liability is in question, we must first name the responsible party before discussing any future indemnification. "Assistant," someone whispered, as if the title could hold what they had just heard. The translator, recovered, didn't translate. There was nothing to translate. The room had traveled to Mara's voice and was content to stay there. On the wall screen, the remote partner leaned in, then nodded once sharply. "Dewey," he said, "correct." The silver-haired woman stepped closer to the table's edge, shawl catching the light, eyes never leaving Mara. "Nai de Kuyan," your accent, she didn't finish. She didn't need to. "Beijing lives in the bones." The millionaire tried to reclaim the floor with a chuckle. "Charming," he said in English, as if the word could shrink what had just grown larger than him. He reached for another idiom and came up with a proverb like a handful of broken porcelain. "We appreciate the..." Mara didn't move. She simply existed in the exact center of the night's meaning, and the room orbited her clarity. The dishwasher's mouth had fallen open. He looked at her like the kid he had once been, in a classroom with a teacher who made the chalk dust hang still. A waiter near the wall whispered, "Do you feel that?" His friend said, "What?" He answered, "Skin. Like skin hearing." Literal goosebumps when she spoke. Mara let the quiet stand long enough for the true question to finish traveling into every corner of the room. Then in Mandarin, soft, spare. She turned back to the person whose face filled the screen and asked the only question that mattered. King Wen, yi ninmen de jia oi mu bao, naimen ziwang zaren yu shay shangden. Nin ki jiming yi ji xiaoyo duixiang ma. Given your transaction goals, who do you intend to bear liability? Can you name the primary responsible party? Silence, not the kind that humiliates, the kind that makes space. The remote partner answered with care. Women Ziwang, Yisai Zing, Yu Zhu Fang Shangden. We expect the principal to bear it in a one-time assignment. He switched to English for the table. We need the indemnity to rest with the principal, not the agents. Otherwise, the enforcement is theater. The silver-haired woman's mouth softened into something like relief. Finally, she murmured. The translator sat down. He had nothing left to carry across the bridge. Someone had rebuilt it under his feet. Mara placed her hand over the cloth again, anchoring herself back in her body. The blue stitch kissed her lifeline. She did not look triumphant. She looked like someone who had returned a book to its proper shelf. The millionaire, stripped of audience and echo, stared at her as if a wall had just opened into a view he didn't recognize. He managed a smile that showed too many teeth. Well, he said in English, seems the help has hobbies. He laughed, seeking approval and finding only the dull bounce of his own voice off glass. No one laughed with him. On the wall, the remote partner said in Mandarin, Zixi Nai de Zhizheng. Thank you for the correction. Then, in English for the record, we will proceed once liability assignment is documented. Otherwise, there is no deal. He waited. The millionaire didn't answer. Mara did not fill the silence. She had already done what language is meant to do, reveal truth without injury and injury without spectacle. The silver-haired woman inclined her head again, a small bow you might give a professor after a lucid lecture. The gesture traveled down the table as understanding often does, quiet, contagious. The hinge had turned. The door of the night had swung to a different room. For a moment the chandelier seemed louder than breath. Its crystals chimed faintly as air shifted through the room, filling the silence Mara had made. The Beijing investors, halfway risen from their chairs, slowly sat back down. Their eyes were on her now, not the millionaire, not the translator, not even the screen, but her. A maid with a cloth still folded neatly in her hand, standing as if she had not just rerouted the current of millions. The silver-haired woman broke the pause first. She spoke in Mandarin, voice low but carrying. Nai de Kuyan, Jiu Zhang Wo Zai Beijing Shang Daxae Shi Ting de Laoshi. Your accent is like the professors I studied under in Beijing. The younger investor beside her leaned forward. Where did you study? He asked. The millionaire barked a laugh before Mara could reply. Study? Don't be ridiculous. She's housekeeping. His hand slashed the air as though the correction itself could erase what had just occurred, but the investors didn't look at him. They were watching Mara. She let the cloth rest on the sideboard and lifted her chin. I studied in Beijing, she said simply in Mandarin. Years ago, I stayed until winter taught me precision. The words landed with the stillness of snow. The dishwasher nearly dropped the stack of cups in his arms. The other staff froze, their eyes darting between her and the millionaire, unsure which reality to obey. The translator, headset limp around his neck, whispered in awe, She speaks like home. The remote partner on the screen cleared his throat. Then let us continue with her. The millionaire snapped. No, she's not, she's nobody. She's just the maid. The silver-haired woman's gaze cut to him, sharp enough to slice a suit to ribbons. Then tonight the maid understood what you did not. Gasps rippled around the room. The millionaire's smirk faltered. He tried again. This is absurd. She's not authorized. She is accurate, the woman interrupted. Her words in Mandarin were crisp as porcelain. Nai bu zhai dao ta zhai dao. You did not know, she knew. The younger investor leaned back, folding his arms. Accuracy is the only authorization we require. Applause broke, not thunderous but sudden, spontaneous, raw. A clap here, then there, spreading like sparks on dry grass. Waiters joined with hesitant palms, then with relief, as though they were clapping for themselves too. The millionaire's face drained of color. He laughed again, brittle. Applause? For what? Repeating a phrase. Parlor tricks don't close deals. No, said the remote partner, eyes steady on Mara. but precision does. And she gave it. Mara did not bow, did not smile. She simply folded her hands in front of her apron, breathing slow. The cloth lay on the sideboard, blue stitch visible like a horizon line marking where the night had turned. The applause faded into a deeper silence, the kind that waits for someone to name the truth. Mara spoke then, softly but firmly, her Mandarin clean, each word sliding into place like tiles on a roof. Zhai zhai y zhai, bu zhai y bu zhai shi zhai I. To know what you know, and to know what you do not, that is wisdom. The investors leaned forward, reverent. The translator lowered his eyes, humbled. The millionaire swallowed, stuttering, That's what I meant. No, Mara said gently, turning to him at last. That's what you tried to mean. The room stilled again. Her correction wasn't cruel. It was exact, a truth laid bare without injury but undeniable. The silver-haired woman rose to her feet. She inclined her head toward Mara. We would prefer, she said in English now, for the record, to continue this discussion with the person who knows what she is saying. The applause came again, fuller this time. Waiters straightened. The dishwasher grinned, eyes wet. Even the quartet, cases in hand, tapped bows against palms. The millionaire sat frozen, glass trembling in his hand. For once his Mandarin failed him entirely. Mara picked up the cloth, folded it once more, and placed it gently on the table. She had not raised her voice. She had not demanded a stage. She had simply returned the words to their rightful shape. And in doing so, she had shifted the entire room. The applause settled like ash after fireworks, soft but undeniable. The chandelier still glittered above, but its light no longer belonged to the millionaire. It illuminated Mara. She didn't move to claim it. She stood by the sideboard, apron plain, the cloth with the blue stitch folded once more in her hand. Her chest rose and fell like she had simply finished polishing another glass, but everyone else moved around her. The silver-haired investor approached first. She extended her hand, not the polite fingertips she had given the millionaire earlier, but a full, steady clasp. Your Mandarin is, she switched languages mid-sentence. Ben Dai Rain de Junk, native precise. Mara bowed her head slightly, accepting without deflecting. It was taught to me with care, she said. The younger investor leaned forward. And yet you serve wine here. His voice carried not contempt but bewilderment, as if the equation of brilliance and servitude could not compute. Mara's eyes softened. I serve where I am needed. That answer traveled through the staff line like an electric current. Waiters straightened their shoulders. The dishwasher exhaled. Even the banquet manager, clipboard clutched like a shield, found herself blinking as if re-seeing the woman she had ordered into silence. At the head table, the millionaire shifted in his seat, face a blend of fury and fear. He tried to laugh again, but it landed flat. This is all very charming, he said, voice brittle, but let's be clear, she is not authorized to speak on behalf of this company. The remote partner's voice crackled from the screen. Then perhaps the company needs to reconsider who it authorizes. A ripple ran through the guests, half gasp, half hum of approval. The translator, headset abandoned, stood and gave Mara a small, respectful nod. You reminded me why I learned this language in the first place, he said. For truth, not for flattery. The silver-haired woman gestured to an empty chair at the table. Please, sit. Mara hesitated, then shook her head gently. I stand better. And she did. She belonged exactly where she was, not climbing into their space, but commanding it from the margin they had tried to trap her in. The investors leaned toward her nonetheless. Questions flowed in Mandarin, careful and precise this time, no longer filtered through the millionaire's ego. They wanted clarity. They wanted accuracy. And she gave it, each answer shaped like porcelain, each tone as balanced as the cloth folded in her hand. Behind her, the staff watched. The dishwasher mouthed silently, Professor. The millionaire could not sit still. He slammed his palm against the table. Enough! This is my house, my deal, my language. His voice cracked on the last word, but the Beijing investors no longer looked at him. They looked at the maid with the blue-stitched cloth. The silver-haired woman said it plainly, for everyone in both languages to hear. Respect is earned, not given. Tonight she earned it. You did not. The sentence struck harder than any applause. The millionaire's mouth opened, then shut. He poured another drink but did not raise it. His empire of mirrors had lost its reflection. Mara placed the cloth gently on the sideboard, smoothing the blue line with her thumb. It no longer looked like a rag. In that moment, it was a banner, an emblem of truth carried quietly, folded patiently, revealed only when the night demanded it. The investors shifted, standing not to leave but to gather closer to her. The silver-haired woman asked, "If you were in charge of this conversation, what would you insist on first?" Mara met her eyes without flinching. "That responsibility be named clearly," she said in Mandarin. "Ambiguity benefits only those who intend to escape it." The remote partner on the screen leaned forward, nodding. "Yes, that, exactly that." The applause did not return, but something stronger did, alignment. The room itself had reoriented around her. The millionaire sat alone at the head table, surrounded yet deserted. His power, once puffed by language, shrank in the face of actual fluency. His glass trembled as he lifted it again, but no one toasted back. Mara lowered her gaze, not in defeat but in dignity. She did not need to hold the spotlight. The spotlight had already moved and it wasn't going back. The dishwasher leaned toward her as he passed with empty cups. "You could have had them cheer your name," he whispered. Mara shook her head faintly. "Names don't last. Truth does." He nodded, though he didn't fully understand. "Not yet." The silver-haired woman gathered her papers, turned once more to Mara and said, "When we write the record of this evening, your words will be the ones that stand." Mara inclined her head. Nothing more. The cloth lay folded on the sideboard, blue stitch facing up like a signature. It was no longer the servant's rag. It was the horizon line of the room's new order. The night ended without a toast. That was a kind of ceremony, too. The Beijing investors left in a quiet current, nodding to Mara as they passed, small bows, the kind you give to a person who returned meaning to a sentence. The remote partner's face winked off the wall. The quartet zipped their cases. The millionaire remained at the head table, an emperor alone with his porcelain. He reached for another aphorism and found only air. Mara gathered plates with the same precision she had used to gather a wayward claws. She did not hurry. She did not savor. She worked. In the kitchen, the banquet manager appeared with a clipboard she suddenly seemed embarrassed to hold. "I misread the room," she murmured, not quite meeting Mara's eyes. "Thank you for," she swallowed the rest. "Praise is heavy when you're not practiced in carrying it." "Good work," Mara nodded. "Good night." The dishwasher hovered, phone in one hand, stack of cups in the other, tearing between questions. He blurted the smallest one. "Did I hear you say indemnity like it's the easiest word in the world? Only in the right language." She rinsed a pan. "Everything's easy when it's said true," he laughed, flushed and awkward. "My mom's going to think I met a ghost, a professor in an apron. She'll love you." He lifted his phone like a promise. "I'll tell her about the horizon line." "The what?" "The blue stitch," he said, pointing at her cloth. "Looks like a horizon. I kept staring whenever I couldn't breathe." Mara smoothed the cloth between her palms, the blue thread calm as dusk. "Horizon lines help when rooms tilt," she said. They finished in the quiet rhythm of after, where relief replaces adrenaline and the smells of butter and citrus sink into the bones. The millionaire left through the side door without a word. Nobody followed. The echo did not arrive as gossip. It arrived as practice. A week later, a new laminated card appeared beside the staff time clock. Not HR's font, not the manager's dry list. A different hand had written, "Horizon, name the thing exactly. If you don't know, say you don't. Tone equals intention. Check both. Write it right before you say it fast. Breathe." Someone had traced a thin blue line across the bottom. In pre-shift briefings, the manager started doing 2-minute clarity. Servers raised a hand with a term they didn't understand, and the room answered without shame. The dishwasher taught a few tones he remembered. Mara corrected him less than she could have, and precisely when it mattered. They practiced thank you, please, no nuts, no pork, who carries responsibility. The words felt different on their tongues when they knew what they protected. A month after the dinner, a smaller banquet gathered in the same room. The millionaire tried a new Mandarin phrase and stopped halfway, catching himself on a wobble he finally heard. He nodded to the translator instead. It wasn't humility. It was a survival instinct. But the result was the same. He didn't swing the language like a blade. The Beijing woman with the silver hair sent a small package to the house. No letterhead, no ceremony. Inside, a slim notebook with paper the color of old rice, and on the first page, a sentence written in brushwork so clean the strokes looked inevitable. Jai jai wai jai, bu jai wai bu jai, shi jai I. Underneath, in English, to know what you know, to know what you don't, wisdom. The manager read it aloud in the staff room and hung the page in a cheap black frame. It looked like a window someone had forgotten to measure and accidentally made perfect. The dishwasher passed his Mandarin quiz with a score that made his mother cry over a voice note. He celebrated by sewing a thin blue stitch into the corner of his own polishing cloth. A week later, other cloths grew blue too, crooked, straight, wide, thin, the way a story becomes true in many hands. Mara didn't ask for this. She arrived for each shift on time. She checked the champagne fridge. She leveled chair legs with felt pads no one saw. She corrected menus softly, and sometimes not at all. She folded her cloth along the blue line and worked the list she'd written years ago on a different continent, when the world was wind and winter, and the only way through was to place every word with care. There was an offer once. It came on a letterhead that smelled faintly of cologne. The company invited her to a consultative conversation. She read it in the corridor with the buzzing sconce which she still pressed with her thumb some nights when it remembered to tremble. She smiled, folded the paper, and set it under the leg of a wobbly table. The table steadied. Some letters are best used for balance. She did not want a desk. She wanted a room that listened, so the room learned. By spring, the translator stopped hedging to protect the boss and started translating to protect meaning. The manager asked, "What's the exact word?" before sending a menu to print. The servers wrote tone marks in pencil like tiny birds hovering above vowels. Someone kept a list of idioms on the back of the prep door, and on nights when no one was looking, Mara added one or crossed one out. Respect came differently now. It didn't arrive in applause. It arrived in chairs that didn't wobble when a man made a point, in desserts that didn't harm, in a boss who hesitated before he handled a word that wasn't his, in a dishwasher who could teach a tone, in a cloth with a blue stitch that steadied hands up and down the staff line. One afternoon, the silver-haired woman returned, unannounced, between flights. She stepped into the corridor with the framed maps and paused beneath the sconce that had finally learned silence. Mara was at the sideboard, arranging stems by height so they looked like a city seen from far away. They looked at each other the way people do who have shared a language that isn't just words. The woman placed 2 books on the counter, grammar on top, poetry beneath. "For your breaks," she said in Mandarin. Mara smiled at the order. "Poetry first," she answered, touching the lower spine. "Grammar always arrives late but leaves last." The woman laughed, the sound pure as water. She did not ask why Mara still wore an apron. She could see the answer in the room. Before she left, she glanced at the time clock. The laminated horizon card had grown soft at the corners from hands touching it. She traced the blue line with her finger. "You are changing them," she said. Mara shook her head. "The room is changing itself. I'm just keeping the floor level." The woman looked like she might argue and then decided to let excellence have its own grammar. She bowed and disappeared down the map-lit hall. That night, a new waiter fumbled a greeting, flattening a tone into something that meant the wrong thing. He winced, cheeks hot. Mara touched the cloth to her palm, lifted her other hand, and traced the tone in the air, dips and rises like a quiet conductor. He tried again. The vowel behaved. Relief changed his posture the way accuracy changes the angle of a door. Suddenly, the hinges worked. On her way home, Mara passed a storefront window and saw herself doubly inside the glass apron cloth, a woman whose face had learned weather, and on the street, tired, upright, unafraid. She paused to adjust nothing. She kept walking. The horizon travels with you when it's stitched into your hand. At some future banquet, a guest would quote a proverb and wait for a laugh that didn't come. The staff would keep working. The translator would clear his throat. The manager would ask for the exact word. The guest would try again or stop. Either way, the room would remain level. It had learned a new gravity. Mara finished her closing list. She set the last glass on the shelf by sound, not sight. A tiny chime when crystal met would exactly square. She folded the cloth, blue side in then out because horizon lines should be seen sometimes, and slid it into her apron. She clicked the kitchen light. The corridor's sconces held steady. The map of Beijing looked like a promise rather than a loss. She locked the service door and stepped into night air that smelled like rain considering its options. Somewhere, a train lifted its voice and put it down again. She walked toward the bus stop, past the garbage bins that would be different and the sky that would not. Sometimes justice arrives without applause, she thought, the sentence so light it barely dented the dark. Sometimes it arrives folded like a cloth. And it keeps the room steady when hands shake. Behind her, in the staff room, the framed page with the brushwork waited for morning. Someone would touch the blue line. Someone would breathe. Someone would put a word back where it belongs, and the room would remember how to listen. On a long table, rows of wine glasses waited, inverted like glass bells, each catching a sliver of afternoon sun. She lifted one and turned it toward the light. A hairline smear across the bowl flashed like a comet. She folded her cloth into a clean triangle and erased it with 2 patient circles. The cloth was cotton, cream, and worn at the edges from 1,000 washes. She'd stitched a single blue line near the hem, just to know when it was hers. The line steadied her hands when the world tried to tilt. In the kitchen, the cooks shouted times. Oil hissed, lemons surrendered their fragrance, and a pastry chef torched a sugar crust to glass. Mara moved like water through all of it, light, invisible, inevitable, refilling bins of ice, swapping dead lighters for live ones, laying a bandage on a new waiter's finger without comment, the pale strip disappearing beneath a sleeve as if the cut had never happened. At 402, she found the banquet manager pacing, phone pressed to one ear, clipboard against the other. "No, Tony, we cannot seat the Beijing group at table 7. It's got a view of the emergency exit. It feels cheap." "No, I wait." She spotted Mara. "Could you polish the backup stems, the good ones, and keep clear of the head table when the boss arrives? He's in a mood." He was almost always in a mood on nights like this, when money gathered in clusters and spoke in languages he wanted to own. Mara carried the crate of backup stems to a quiet corner near the service door and began. Pick up by the stem, never the bowl. Breathe lightly, no fog. 2 circles. Quarter turn. 2 circles. Set down. The rhythm steadied her breathing the way a metronome settles a pianist. As she worked, the dishwasher breezed in from the alley, cheeks pink from the chill and phone lit with a video call. A woman's face filled the screen, gray hair swept back, speaking fast in Mandarin. The dishwasher, a part-time student with navy blue headphones permanently around his neck, laughed and answered in the same language, pure and unself-conscious. He saw Mara and straightened. "Sorry," he said, covering the mic. "My mom calls before my night classes. I'll keep it down." Mara smiled. "No need," she said, and without looking up from the glass, she added in Mandarin, gentle and musical. "Tell her you'll ace the quiz, and that the alley draft is coming from the cracked molding near the door." The student froze. On the screen, his mother leaned in, squinting. Mara lifted her eyes and gave a small nod to the phone, a greeting that belonged to kitchens and bus stops and anywhere working people recognized one another across a border of uniforms. "Your tones," he whispered when he'd ended the call, "are from Beijing." "From winter," Mara said. "Winters teach you to be exact. You breathe wrong and your teeth hurt." He grinned, then glanced toward the corridor. "Careful tonight," he murmured. "Boss has been practicing idioms again." "Has he?" she said, as if discussing the weather. By 5, florists floated through with buckets, the lighting tech tested the dimmers, and a man from rentals wheeled in a velvet rope the color of wine. The Millionaire arrived at 6 on the dot, a dark silhouette in the frosted glass doorway before the censor caught him, and the doors whispered open. He shook the manager's hand without looking at him, then the sommelier's, then a venture capitalist's, saving his brightest smile for the mirrored wall near the entrance. He liked the Mandarin greetings because they felt like fireworks when he launched them. He liked the way investors blinked, impressed, as if he'd shot sparks from his tongue. He liked the power of saying something others could not. He greeted the Beijing group with a cheerful Neiman how and then a more ambitious sentence, one that tumbled out with all the tones slightly off. like a song played on a piano needing tuning. The guests, too polite to correct him, smiled and answered slowly. Mara's ear caught every friction point, the way he flattened a third tone, the way he turned to into da, the way he strolled straight through a phrase he didn't fully understand and made up meaning on the way out. She felt an old ache spark and fade. Not anger. Something more exact. The ache of hearing a word you love handled without care. She moved through the pre-dinner swirl, placing fresh towels in the washrooms, aligning chairs by touch so a row felt straight before it looked it, catching a small wobble in the head table and sliding a felt pad under the short legs so no glass would shiver when a man pounded his fist to make a point. She slipped a spare battery into her pocket for the lapel mic. She checked again on the champagne fridge. The needle had kissed the perfect mark. At 711, a busboy spilled a narrow ribbon of Pinot across the parquet, the stain racing toward an extension cord coiled beneath the dessert table. Mara saw it not with her eyes but with the future. She saw the arc of a guest's heels slipping, the glass shattering, the lawsuit months later. She stepped in before time could gather speed. Left hand pinched the cord. Right hand dragged a white cloth across the liquid's path with a clean, practiced S-curve. The ribbon stopped, obedient as if it had met a wall. "Nice save," the new waiter breathed. Mara just nodded and swapped the wet cloth for her own, the one with the blue stitch. The one that had never failed her. By the time soups landed, the room had become a low, breathing animal. Conversations, the clink of silver, the faint hum of the dimmers settling into a warm dusk. The millionaire told stories with his hands. He angled his body toward power the way a plant leans toward light. When he laughed, people joined him because that's what you do when money laughs. He drifted sometimes into Mandarin mid-sentence, not to include the Beijing guests, but to perform for them. He spoke to impress the English listeners and remind the Mandarin speakers that, in this room, their language lived in his mouth now too. Mara passed behind chairs like a whisper, trading empty plates for clean ones, lifting a fallen napkin with a deft flick so it landed as gracefully as a dove alighting. A woman in pearls watched her and said to no one in particular, "I do love when staff are efficient. It's like good wallpaper, you only notice it when it's bad." The table chuckled softly. The comment folded itself into the room's fabric, barely a wrinkle. The first small cut of the night, there would be others. Near the dessert station, the sommelier's pen rolled toward the edge. Mara caught it with the back of her hand without looking. She set it down parallel to the menu. Pattern soothe, order calms. She had learned that once in another life, in a city with ring roads and winter air that bit hard and clean. In that life, she'd run a whiteboard covered in columns that looked like this laminated card, except the numbers in those columns had the power to move ships. A line of Mandarin more complex than a greeting floated across the head table. The millionaire attempted an idiom about the wind changing and the wise sailor tacking early. He inverted a clause and flattened a tone. The Beijing guest smiled, correct enough to be kind, gently shifting the grammar back into shape as they answered. Mara's hands paused for half a second above a tray of spoons. The blue stitch pressed into her index finger. She felt the idiom finish itself in her mouth, syllable by syllable, the way muscle remembers a hymn. She set the spoons down and moved on. When the investors excused themselves between courses, the millionaire stayed, admiring his reflection in the dark window. He practiced a phrase under his breath. He turned it again, liking the feel of it, the showing-off shape it made in the air. When his guests returned, he called for attention with a light tap on his glass and smiled toward the staff as if they were part of the entertainment package. That's when he turned the language into a blade. But that would be the next beat. For now, the room ripened to it, unaware. For now, Mara's world was this: a cloth, a list, 100 micro-interventions that kept disaster at bay while praise flowed uphill. She carried a fresh tray of stems toward the wall where she'd listened best. She took her place, as if tracing a chalk outline she'd drawn there herself, and waited for the moment when the night would ask for a different kind of excellence than spotless glass. The dishwasher passed by again and murmured, "If he throws idioms around, just watch yourself." She smiled, small. "I'm always watching." The staff's eyes slid away, grateful for her quiet competence, not yet aware that it was the only net stretched beneath them all. The doors to the patio whispered open. A cool drift of air crossed the room and made the candles flicker. Somewhere a string quartet tightened its tuning. The millionaire rose, chairs scraped, 100 bodies turned toward his voice. Mara folded the cloth along its blue stitch until it sat snug against her palm, like a promise you make to yourself and tell no one. And when the first insulting sentence cracked across the room like a belt, she was exactly where she needed to be, silent, steady, seeing everything. The first half of the dinner was a parade of surfaces, gleaming silver, polite laughter, Mandarin fragments peppered into English like garnish. But surfaces crack, and when they do, everyone looks to see who will fall through. It happened as the millionaire leaned forward with his elbow on the head table, swirling his Bordeaux in a wide crystal bowl. His voice carried the weight of a man certain that silence meant admiration. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, first in English, then repeating in Mandarin. His tones wobbled, the syntax bent, but his smile pinned everything in place. "In this house, we reward competence, but let's be honest," he pivoted suddenly toward the line of staff. "There isn't much of it here." The investors chuckled politely, unsure whether to follow his cruelty or resist it. He raised his glass. "Let's test the theory, shall we? I'll give them a proverb. If even one can answer, I'll double their pay for the night. If not, well." His smirk cut the sentence short. The implication was clear. He turned, gaze sweeping like a spotlight. Any of you, repeat after me, Sha Jai Jing Hu." The syllables clattered from his tongue, rough, almost careless. Still, the room reacted, investors nodding, whispering. The waiters stiffened, eyes dropping like blinds. One whispered, "What did he say?" Another shook his head quickly, Don't even try." The millionaire laughed, savoring their paralysis. "Ah, as I thought, kill the chicken to scare the monkey. The perfect proverb for leadership. Don't you agree?" He looked straight at Mara, who was setting fresh glasses on a side table. She paused, just for a fraction of a breath. The cloth with the blue stitch pressed warm against her palm. In Beijing, she had once heard a professor explain the origin of the phrase, an emperor using execution as spectacle to keep the court in line. Back then, she had debated its ethics in fluent Mandarin with a roomful of students. Tonight, she stood in a plain apron, polishing someone else's crystal. The investors laughed more freely now, emboldened by her silence. One nudged another. "See, they don't understand the language of power." The millionaire leaned back, victorious. "It's not their fault. They were never meant to do more than clean up after us." The words slid like oil across the tablecloth. The staff stood frozen, shame pressing their shoulders toward the floor. Mara's hand tightened around the glass she was holding. The cloth squeaked faintly against the crystal, a sound almost no one noticed, but the dishwasher did. He looked at her, wide-eyed. She lowered her gaze, masking the fire with stillness. She had learned the art of stillness long ago. It was how you survived boardrooms where people doubted your credentials, airports where officials questioned your accent, jobs where managers assumed your silence meant ignorance. Stillness gave you space. Stillness let the cruel show their full hand. Stillness could feel like surrender until it wasn't. She set the glass down gently. The millionaire lifted his wine. "Respect is earned, not given. And you see, my friends, some people will never earn it." Applause scattered down the table. Cameras flashed. Investors smiled. Mara stepped back into the shadow near the wall, folding her cloth into a perfect square, her eyes lowered but burning. She let the room laugh, let the millionaire shine, because tonight was not the night she would stumble into their trap. Tonight was the night she would wait. The cloth in her hand no longer felt like a rag. It was a fuse, unlit but ready. And when the right spark came, she knew exactly what would happen. The room never recovered its balance. Dinner moved on, lamb-plated with sprigs of rosemary, soufflés that rose like golden towers, but the air had shifted. The humiliation lingered, invisible as smoke, settling into the staff's shoulders. They walked quicker, quieter, as if to erase themselves before the next blow landed. Mara carried trays of stemware to the sideboard. Her hands moved with mechanical calm, yet inside, the words echoed. They were never meant to do more than clean up after us. She kept her head down, but her ears stayed sharp. At the head table, the Beijing investors exchanged glances. Their politeness masked discomfort. They had caught the millionaire's mangled tones, his careless bravado. Politeness demanded silence, but not blindness. The dishwasher sidled past Mara near the kitchen doors. "He'll keep going," he whispered. "He likes when they laugh." His eyes flicked nervously toward the staff line. Best stay small. Mara gave no reply. She didn't need to. She'd lived long enough to know the pattern. Cruelty never satisfied itself in one round. It circled back again and again, each strike sharper, daring someone to resist. Inside the kitchen, the banquet manager barked orders, rattling off numbers for dessert plates, scolding a waiter for misplacing silver. But beneath her clipped tone was tension. She'd heard the exchange too. She knew the boss's games could tip from amusement into danger. "Keep your heads down," she muttered as she passed Mara. "Don't get clever, he's in front of money tonight." Mara polished another glass, the cloth's blue stitch warming under her grip. Not clever, just silent. But silence carried its own weight. The millionaire called for attention again, this time lifting his glass high. His Mandarin stumbled through a toast, words falling like marbles down a staircase. The investors clapped politely. Then he added in English, "I should test them again. Surely someone's learned a phrase by now." The staff froze mid-step. Plates hovered, trays wobbled. Mara felt a waiter beside her tense like a wire. "Don't look at him," the man whispered. "Just pretend you don't hear." The millionaire scanned the room, searching for prey. His gaze lingered on Mara, the only one not visibly trembling. She kept her face blank, eyes lowered, polishing her glass in slow, perfect circles. "Perhaps they can repeat something simpler," he said loudly. "Let's see. Jai jai y jai, bu jai y bu jai, shi jai I." The sentence cracked across the air, butchered beyond sense. Mara felt her chest tighten. The phrase was ancient, sacred almost, to know what you know, and to know what you do not know, that is true knowledge. But on his tongue it became a parody. Investors exchanged polite looks. None corrected him. Not yet. The staff shrank further into their uniforms, all but invisible. Mara folded her cloth again, the gesture small but steady, as though aligning herself with something deeper than the room's cruelty. She could hear her old professor's voice in Beijing, the rhythm of the phrase recited with reverence. She had debated its meaning in seminar halls where people scribbled notes at her words. And now here that wisdom had been turned into mockery, wielded as a weapon to shrink those who served. She inhaled slow, exhaled slower. The dishwasher met her eyes from across the room. His lips shaped a word, careful. She nodded faintly. Careful, but not forever. The millionaire smirked, basking in his own noise. "See, they don't even flinch. They don't know if I'm quoting Confucius or reading a takeout menu." Laughter rippled. "This is why leadership is for the few. The rest," he gestured vaguely toward the staff line, "are wallpaper." Mara set the polished glass down with deliberate care. The blue stitch of her cloth brushed against the rim, a private vow stitched into fabric. Wallpaper. They thought she was part of the wall, but walls remember, walls hear. And sometimes walls speak. Not tonight, not yet, but soon. She picked up another glass. The light from the chandelier broke into rainbows across its curve. She wiped once, twice, the way she'd always done, invisible, precise, waiting. The worst part of a long night isn't the cruelty. It's the repetition of small errors no one else hears. Mara heard them all. A clink that meant a hairline crack in a stem. The faint thud that meant a chair leg would wobble when a guest leaned back to make a point. The second syllable in Gongxiang flattened into a first tone, turning shared value into tribute, and the way a Beijing guest's eyelids fluttered, polite, as if he'd swallowed a seed whole and didn't want to show the cough. She moved through the noise like a tuner with perfect pitch. Near the bar, two servers debated whether the label on a gleaming bottle read osmanthus or olive. Both words were printed in English below, but the Chinese characters told a different story. Mara drifted by, eyes skimming the script the way a violinist skims a score. She lifted the bottle gently, angled it toward the downlight, and tapped the character with her index finger. "Gihua," she said softly to the air, not to them, tone dipping then rising like a swallow. "Osmanthus." The servers blinked, then nodded as if they'd solved it themselves. At the appetizer station, the new waiter worried over the menu card for the Beijing table. The manager said the printer got the Pinyin from Google. Does this look right? The card read Kingjin Niyuru, halal beef, except the diacritics were wrong and the spacing made it read like a different word entirely. Mara took a pencil from behind her ear, erased quietly, and rewrote the tones by instinct, the third dipping low, the first steady as horizon, the second tilting up like a hand lifting to ask a question. She slid the card back into its acrylic holder just as the guests returned. The new waiter stared, as if he'd watched someone retune a piano with a single twist of the wrist. "Thank you," he whispered. Mara nodded and kept moving. No ownership. No spotlight. The cloth with the blue stitch warmed under her grip, catching the sweat from her palm before it could smudge glass. In the kitchen alcove, the dishwasher fought with a crate of saucers and a phone buzzing with messages from his mother. Reminders to wear a scarf, to lock his bike, to eat fruit even on busy nights. He answered in Mandarin, laughing, then winced. "She says my tones are getting lazy." "Tell her the kitchen air dries your throat," Mara said without looking up, slipping back into that winter true cadence, "and you'll practice ZHCHSH tomorrow morning." He grinned. "You sound like my grade school teacher." "I sound like someone who got corrected by a 9-year-old once and never forgot." He hesitated. "Where did you learn?" "You don't have to, in a city with ring roads," she said. "Where the wind comes in like a rule and leaves like a rumor." He didn't ask more. People who live by humility learn the edges of other people's privacy the way swimmers learn the edges of a pool. Back in the hall, a translator from the investor team spoke briskly into a headset, relaying the millionaire's remarks to a remote partner. Mara heard the translator pause, then hedge around the botched idiom about knowledge from earlier. The translator's Mandarin was fine, nimble, even, but the millionaire's spin forced a workaround that didn't belong in this room. Translation wasn't a carpet you rolled over bad flooring, it was the floor. If the floor was crooked, everything that stood on it leaned. Mara adjusted a candle wick so the flame would stop guttering and murmured to the air, "Know what you know what you don't, that's the real thing." The tones fell into place by muscle memory. The translator glanced up sharply, as if someone had blown across the mouth of a bottle and made a note. He saw only a maid with a cloth. At the head table, the millionaire shifted into a breezy story about his first trip to China. He made a joke about menus not having translations back then, and a softer one about learning to read from hotel signs. The Beijing guests answered with the kind of smiles that lived halfway between courtesy and the door. One of them, an older woman with silver hair pinned into a comb, caressed the rim of her water glass, listening, saying little. When she laughed, it was with her eyes closed as if to spare them the sight of what they were agreeing to. A few minutes later, she excused herself and headed toward the washroom. It was down a short corridor lined with framed maps, old Beijing in sepia, the lake by the summer palace drawn as if the paper itself had been thirsting for it. The corridor lights had been set too low and one sconce buzzed, a high insect whine that lodged in the back of the skull. Mara stepped into the corridor just as the woman approached the buzzing light, hands half lifting toward her temples. "Too bright," the woman said in Mandarin, smiling apologetically the way people do when they criticize a host's home. "Too loud." Mara reached up and twisted the dimmer a quarter turn, then pressed her thumb to the sconce's loose base until the filament settled. The corridor sighed into quiet. The older woman blinked. "Thank you," she said, the thanks falling in crisp northern vowels. "You're welcome," Mara replied, carefully, neutrally, letting the tones land like a music box she closed before the melody could give her away. The woman paused, head tilted. "Your accent," she began, then stopped. She took in the cloth, the apron, the blue stitch like a thread of sky in an old shirt. People learned to make maps of one another in a single glance. "Nai Shizhe Beijing Zhe de Ma. Did you study in Beijing?" Mara bent to straighten the corner of a rug that had curled up like a lip ready to catch a heel. "I learned to listen there," she said in Mandarin, keeping it simple, the way you speak to a friend in a noisy train station. "Listening travels better than luggage." The older woman's face softened with private recognition not of Mara, but of the city that lives under skin. She nodded once. "Ting de chu Lila, I can hear it." Then she went on, the conversation wound back into the room and the corridor returned to its maps and its quiet. Mara pressed her palm to the sconce a second longer, feeling the metal's faint heat against her skin. The cloth caught a whisper of dust, its blue line calm against the cream, as if someone had drawn a horizon in her hand. Back in the dining room, the quartet took up a lilting waltz and the millionaire stood to draw another proverb from his storehouse. He aimed it like a dart at the staff line. Staff turned into silhouettes. The manager's smile froze like sugar. Mara stepped behind the dessert station and faced a problem more urgent than humiliation. A guest with a severe nut allergy had just handed back a plate bearing a smear of praline. The pastry chef swore he hadn't garnished the wrong slice. The server swore he'd grabbed from the nut-free tray. The plates looked identical. Mara flicked her eyes over the labels. English labels were clean. The kitchen's internal Chinese labels, secondary, stuck on with painter's tape, had been written in a rush. In a looped hand, Haidao walnut looked dangerously like Haidao, a variant usage, and the nut-free tray had a scrawled character that, at a glance, could be read either way. She traced the strokes in the air with her finger, rewriting the radical that changed meaning, then pulled the nut-free tray aside and swapped the plate. No speech needed, just precision. The kind you learn when winter tells you to breathe right. "Nice catch," the pastry chef breathed, unaware that she'd just moved a catastrophe 2 inches to the left. Mara wiped the counter once, twice. The cloth, warm now, erased the almond dust no one else could see. Near the head table, the translator hesitated again, headset to lips, translating a joke that wasn't a joke into something that wouldn't get anyone fired. The millionaire basked. The investors watched the room more than they watched him. All power performs, all intelligence listens. The dishwasher reappeared with a stack of plates and a look that belonged to a younger brother watching an older sibling stand on a cliff edge. "He's winding up again," he murmured. "This one sounds complicated." "Complicated," Mara said, "is when tone and intention disagree." "What does that make tonight?" he asked. "Practice," she said, folding the cloth, aligning the blue stitch with the seam of her palm. "For everyone." The older Beijing woman returned to her seat, passing Mara with the briefest nod, the kind strangers share when they both know the same city by smell. The millionaire lifted his glass. Another idiom wobbled out of his mouth like a kite in bad wind. Laughter obediently followed, 2 beats late. Mara set her tray down on the sideboard and leaned one hip against it, as if resting. She wasn't resting. She was measuring. The distance between insult and intervention. The angle of a phrase corrected in the least amount of sound. The instant at which silence stopped preserving dignity and started ceding it. She rubbed the cloth's edge between thumb and forefinger. The blue line was no longer just a mark. It was a metronome. It set the tempo of what would come next. Across the room, the dishwasher's phone buzzed with a message from his mother, a voice note, scolding and tender. He mouthed, "Practice," to himself and to her and to the air. Mara closed her eyes for a single heartbeat and saw an old classroom, chalk dust suspended in winter sun, a professor writing characters so cleanly that every stroke looked like a decision. She remembered staying late to wipe the board, the sponge heavy and cold, the characters blurring underwater and reforming behind her eyelids when she slept. She opened her eyes to the chandelier's soft burn. The next proverb would be the one that risked more than pride. The next mistranslation would bend something structural, risk, liability, face. She could feel it coming in the way the room's currents shifted, the way the translator's shoulders rose, the way the older woman's ring finger tapped her glass 3 times without sound. Mara breathed in the heat of the room, the citrus from the kitchen, the faint ozone of dimmers. She breathed out and found herself, as always, inside the quiet between notes. When the moment arrived, she would not raise her voice. She would simply put the words back where they belonged. The night tilted. You could feel it, like a tray sliding just enough to threaten a fall. The Beijing investors had grown quieter, their smiles tighter, their glances longer at one another. The millionaire, drunk on the sound of his own Mandarin, grew bolder. He liked that no one stopped him. He mistook silence for victory. At the far end of the table, one investor posed a question in crisp Mandarin about liability, a subtle probe into risk sharing in a joint project. The millionaire grinned, nodded as if he understood every syllable, then delivered his translation in English. "Ah, he's asking whether reputation damage counts as loss. Very sophisticated." It wasn't reputation. Mara knew that instantly. The word had been Zairan, liability, legal responsibility. Reputation was Minjiu. Different worlds. One could cost a contract, the other could bankrupt a life. The translator hesitated, headset in hand, unsure which path to follow, truth or the boss's ego. He chose survival, repeating the millionaire's warped version. The investors stiffened. They hadn't been asking about vanity. They'd been testing seriousness.